It looks like fight fans are going to have to wait just a little bit longer to see heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou inside the octagon. The champ went through MCL and ACL surgery on his right leg a couple of months after his last appearance at UFC 270 in January, where he recorded the first defense of his title. Stay tuned to find out more. Starting off, how's Francis been doing and when does he return? Double surgery on the knees is going to knock anyone off their feet for a while, pun intended. Honestly, even returning to Vegas for training next week is astonishing when you consider it's barely been 6 months since Francis went under the knife. It's important to build a realistic timeline for the recovery in our heads. Francis has been up and walking without crutches for a while now, but that does not equate him to being well enough to train. If the doctors clear him for training when he gets his checkup in Vegas, he will need to work considerably on basic training and fitness. He's admitted that he's completely out of shape and needs a pre-training camp before getting back to full-on MMA training. Ngannou may be the most fearsome power puncher in the sport, but he knows all too well that that's not enough every time. With killer contenders like Curtis Blaydes, John Jones, Derek Lewis, and Cyril Gane, the champ needs to be running on all gears. While we were expecting to see Francis in December before his recent admissions, his return may be delayed by a couple more months. The Frenchman expressed his hopes to headline one of the first few pay-per-view events of 2023, so late January, maybe February feels like a safe estimate. Following up, the most likely opponents for Francis's return to fight. Ngannou may have been out of the action for most of the year, but the division waits for no man. In this past year, several names have popped up that would make outstanding matchups for the champ. First of all, we'd like to talk about Curtis Blaydes, 17-3-0. The American heavyweight is woefully underappreciated in the division and is on yet another 3-fight win streak. In fact, Razor Blaydes has only one loss to Lewis in his past 8 fights. Before that, he lost to Francis, and one of his only other losses way back in 2016 was to Francis. Do you see where we're going with this? Blaydes has been improving constantly and consistently despite straight-up killers like Arlovsky, Rosenstruck, Overeem, and Mark Hunt. To see a final bout with Francis, this time for the belt, we wouldn't mind at all. The next two names are in conjunction with one another. Stipe Miocic and John Jones are both the most successful champions in history of their respective divisions. Stipe hasn't fought since he lost the belt, and John hasn't fought in years. But with the UFC now having enough grounds for an interim title fight, Jones has hinted at a super fight with Miocic at UFC 282 in December. Francis would then 100% face the winner of that war. The when, depending on recovery time for the challenger. But even if that doesn't happen, if anyone deserves a rematch after losing the belt, it's Stipe. And if there's one man everyone wants to see Jones fight at heavyweight, it's Francis. There just isn't a bad way this can end. Next up, will Ngannou's next fight be his last in the UFC? UFC President Dana White has come under attack about fighter pay, health insurance policies, and freedom to compete by a lot of fighters. But Francis has often been one of the outspoken champions on the matter. The Cameroon-born fighter has frequently flirted with the possibility of a venture into boxing, but his mindset has solidified in recent times. He is adamant that he wants to do it, and he has been in several verbal jousts with WBC champion Tyson Fury. Although the Gypsy King has, quote, retired, it looks like he's still interested in the super fight with Ngannou. However, Ngannou's boxing ambitions have little to do with just fighting Fury, and he has said it doesn't matter if he fights Tyson or not, he just wants to box. We don't doubt Francis will have a shortage of opponents either. His roots in Africa and Europe have made him into an international superstar, and North America has never been a problem for the Knockout King. He draws a lot of fans, and the competitive challenge that he brings would entice the likes of Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua. This ability to sell tickets would be boosted if, as Francis hinted, the UFC promotes the fight. It would be unprecedented for the MMA promotion to have a feature fight in boxing, and the regulations and glove sizes would all come into question. These are uncertain times though, and we know that Dana loves money-making super fights. Additionally, is money white Ngannou wants to leave? The short answer is yes, but this is a good opportunity to talk about the intricacies in the criticisms made about the UFC financial treatment of its fighters. One of these details that affected Francis personally is the UFC's policy on fighter sponsorships. Even though everyone on the roster is a quote independent contractor, they are subject to some of the most restrictive advertisement policies in all of the professional sports. Since the deal in 2015, fighters are no longer allowed to wear any sort of logo on any apparel. Francis supposedly lost a deal over $1 million with a crypto exchange company because of the UFC's deal with Crypto.com. A share of the profits from the company's advertisement deals is supposed to come down to the fighters, but many have reported that to be negligible. These woes gain more and more meaning when another of Francis's complaints is considered the lack of health insurance for fighters. So even if fighters get paid better on fight night, they still have to cover hospital costs and coaching and training costs themselves. Francis is the embodiment of a self-made man, and his journey from the salt mines of Cameroon has taught him to take control control of his own life. If he feels the UFC is holding him back from realizing his true potential, he could very well leave. He has already achieved championship status and defended his belt. There may be bigger things to achieve elsewhere. Now, in other news, starting with the King of Rio finally retires. Featherweight legend Jose Aldo announced his retirement this week, bringing an end to one of the most loved and respected careers in the sport. Aldo has been with the promotion for 18 years, reigning as the undisputed champion in both WEC and UFC. He clocked 9 defenses of his title, with wins over the likes of Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, and Frankie Edgar. The Brazilian has recently dropped down a weight class and missed out on the opportunity to capture the bantamweight belt at the hands of Peter Yan. Even after that, Aldo went on a 3-fight win streak over some impressive young contenders, seemingly amassing momentum for one last title run before losing unanimously to Dvalishvili. At 36 years old and with 39 fights under his belt, there's a bit of relief over Aldo retiring and avoiding further damage to his body, especially if his effort won't amount to at least another title shot. Like most pundits say, if you are in it to be the eBay in the world, is the damage worth it? Next up, Holland finally speaks up after the loss to Khamzat. Taking a short notice fight against a fighter like Khamzat is a big risk, and it didn't pay off for Holland in his last outing in the octagon. He got bulldozed on the mat and submitted early in the first round, unable to land a single shot on his opponent. Holland is all silver linings though, because he just successfully made his goals of a 6-figure contract, and we feel he got a pretty sweet deal and pay bump when his opponents were changed. The American understands the importance of being an asset to the company, and that entails stepping up in a crisis like last week. Previously, his UFC debut came when he stepped up to take on division boogeyman Thiago Santos, and even then impressed Dana enough with his performance and bravery that he signed Holland. Holland doesn't want to end the year on such a bad showing though, and went forward with his usual banter on Instagram, asking for an MMA fight and not a grappling match before the year's end. Kevin's strength lies in his creative striking, so we hope to see him in a fight where he can showcase those skills soon. If there's something that we know, it's never a boring night with the Trailblazer. Finally, Diaz's departure could spell disaster for the UFC. Free agency is one of the biggest demands for UFC fighters who don't enjoy the benefits of full-time employment, and Diaz has often criticized the restrictions along with Francis Ngannou. His decision to leave the UFC itself comes from a desire to go boxing and potentially open up his own fight promotion. If Nate successfully moves over to boxing and sets up the blueprint, and then Francis Ngannou also decides to leave next year for boxing, the precedent may be too hard to ignore. Lightweight contender Dan Hooker believes that big names like those could show fighters what their worth is in the open market, and that could lead to fighters leaving or banding together to demand a change in the structure. Dana has always been a little slippery on these subjects, but names like Diaz and Ngannou could cause long-term ripples in the fabric of combat sports at large. We hope the next few months show us more of Francis and Diaz's journey. Let us know in the comments where you think that they will end up, and thanks for watching.